Welcome to IFAS St. Lucie County Extension Program, and today we're going to talk about some of the secrets for summer. And some of those secrets for summer, of course, are going to revolve around the landscape and how can we have a really beautiful landscape and yet be helpful to our pocketbooks, and because it gets really hot out in the summertime, so we don't always want to spend a lot of time out there weeding and doing a lot of those kinds of things. So we have with us today Ed Scavarch, our commercial horticulture agent.
Hi, Anita.
And he's going to help us answer some of those questions.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Well, this time of year it gets really warm, and a lot of people are, they're all for being out in the landscape when it's nice and cool in the 70s and all, but now we're getting the 90s. So what kind of things can they do? I mean, if you're out there pulling weeds, what can you do to try not to have to pull so many weeds?
Yeah, we had discussed this a little earlier, and I would hire a high schooler and I'd get a nice glass of iced tea, look out the window, kind of keep an eye on them. But
if
that's just me.
Yeah, that's just you. Okay, and that's if you can find one that would be willing to pull those weeds, right?
Well, but if you're, don't want to spend as much time outside, and I was out in the yard on Sunday, and in 3 hours, really, you can get done in 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
So what you kind of do is you got to kind of prepare yourself for these hotter months, and one of the ways you can do that is during the cooler months. If you don't want to pull weeds, then go in there and into your ornamental bed, maybe put a weed mat down or some newspapers. That way you're recycling, and then put some mulch down there. Probably, you start with 4 inches, let it settle down to about 3 inches, and then that way you're going to be able to prevent weeds from coming up. You're cutting off the sunlight so they can't grow, and then you're also providing some moisture. You can keep that moisture in the soil if it does rain. So that's one of the precautions you can take for weeding.
Okay. So, and of course, if they haven't done that yet, they can still do it. They may only be able to do a little bit at a time, considering they may only want to be outside for an hour or so in the morning to do that. But they could still do that. They could still put their weed barrier down and the mulch on top. And the mulch helps too, right? It
certainly does. Usually go out there earlier in the morning. If you can get out there at 7 or 8 and work maybe until 10, and then later on in the afternoon. But you need to be really careful because it is so hot out. You need to stay hydrated. But yeah, you can do that, and you can go in there with. There's a number of tools that you can weed with instead of just hand weeding. And
there's what we were brought up with the hoe, the garden hoe.
And now they have that little. It's called I call it a hula hoe, and I like that because you're not bent over so far, and it gets the roots, and that's so crucial because you might be out there picking weeds, and you say, okay, well, I picked this, but you didn't get the root out of it, and it's going to grow back in.
And the hula hoe looks kind of like a stirrup on a horse?
Exactly.
Okay.
Perfect description.
Or you're almost kind of like a bike pedal, too, sometimes.
Yep,
yeah.
Either
so
one.
You'd have the two sides, and it goes underneath and pulls it up that way.
And then you just kind of, back and forth and back and forth. It'll loosen up your soil. It'll get your weeds out, and then you can, that's, I think, a lot better than just going and hand weeding. And it also gives you some exercise. You need a little exercise.
Yeah.
And
with your hula.
Yeah, with your hula. Hula hoop.
Yeah. Okay, so you can, all right, now some people want to use other products like, and I guess it would be an herbicide on the ground. So is there herbicides, things that they should be careful of, things they should be knowledgeable of if they're going to use an herbicide?
Well, yes, I think what they're going to need to do is they're going to get what is, to me, it's called a systemic herbicide. And the way that works, it'll contact the leaf, it gets taken in by the leaf, and that pesticide then gets moved all around the stems and the leaves and the roots, and it'll kill out that weed. And, maybe within 5 or 6 days. And there's products in a number of the stores where you can go in and just purchase the whole thing. It's all pre-mixed, ready to use, and you just go ahead and you spray it. Now, a couple of things before you do that is, Anita, you need to read that label. Always read the label. The label is the law, and it's going to tell you what you're going to need in terms of what is called personal protective equipment. You might need gloves, you might need goggles, you might need, shoes, long pants, something like that. So read that label. A lot of that material will come pre-mixed. You go ahead and apply it to the plant, and I would say usually in the morning for some reason, because the plant's starting to move water or translocate water out of it, and there's openings that are created that can pull that pesticide in.
Okay.
So yes, that is definitely another means.
And if they're spraying, that's good for like weeds and like say in a plant bed, you've got a couple weeds here or there, and you got to be careful sometimes that you don't get wind blowing that onto things you don't want it to go on.
Absolutely, drift. And actually that container, if it does have a spray nozzle, that spray nozzle may have an adjustment on it. So if it is windy, you adjust it so that your droplet size is a little bit larger instead of like a mist, and you won't get that drift from it.
Carrying because they're bigger droplets. Got it.
Another thing you have to be careful about is if you have pets. You know, pets, my pet loves to chew on grass and just anywhere in the yard.
Well,
or
a lot of
anywhere
pets
in the
do.
beds.
Yeah, they get hairballs, right?
Right, yeah. So, which is one of the reasons that I'll go out and use a hula hoe as opposed to
spraying.
Yeah.
Okay. And if they're spraying, that was good for the landscape. Now for the lawn, they have to make. Is there a special type of herbicide that they should be using for their lawn?
Well, it depends. Most likely in their lawns, the weeds that they're going to contact is going to be a broadleaf weed. Okay. Let's see. A couple of the names. Dollar weed is a prevalent one that they'll find in there. And in that instance, what they're going to use is a weed and feed product called atrazine. But there's a cutoff date on that. So it's cut off because it gets too hot. It's going to burn your lawn out. Not only that, but it can also induce a disease called gray spot on your turf grass. Okay. So atrazine is usually the one that's used the most.
Okay. So
and it's a broadleaf. And there's very little grassy types of herbicides that would specifically just target a grass weed that you're after. Generally, that would take out the entire area where you apply it.
Okay. All right. And they can't, of course, use a fertilizer June through September anyway, so they wouldn't be able to use the weed and feed.
Right, exactly.
Unless it didn't have any nitrogen or phosphorus in it.
Absolutely, right.
Okay.
And they typically do. So.
And they typically do, right. Yeah. So that probably wouldn't be a product. But they could perhaps go around with Roundup, maybe in isolate. If they've got a weed that's isolated in the grass, they could maybe spray just that, put something over it to keep the spray right there, like a cardboard box or something.
There's also wickers that they can use. It's a little device that you'll put your herbicide in. It's a little tube, and it kind of looks like a golf club, and it'll have a little wick at the end of it. You just go in and you brush what you want to brush, and you keep that product right there at the source.
Instead of going, it's not a whole treatment of the yard.
Right.
It's just
a spot treatment.
Spot treatment. Okay.
Yeah. And if you're really careful, you can do the same thing with the spray. It's just that, you know, you're inevitably going to get some peripheral damage on that. So you may have to go back in and dig that out a little bit. And if it's St. Augustine, those roots will probably grow back together. So
pretty quickly, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess there's different products for different grasses, different herbicides?
Yes, yeah. There'd be one, for instance, atrazine you would use on St. Augustine turf grass, where if it's Bahia, it's a 2,4-D product. Okay. So yeah, and if you cross those up, you're gonna no
damage
matter
your
what,
yard.
You're gonna damage your yard. You're gonna take out the.
So it's good to know.
Area.
If they have any questions, they can go to the website though and look.
Absolutely.
At the University of Florida's website. Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be good. So they can find out more information that way. Well, so we talked a little bit about weeds, which is always lots of times, because of our rainy season and the hot, warm summertime, weeds grow so much. So some of those things might be helpful to people that are listening. Now, a lot of other things grow too. In our landscape plant materials grow. So even the grass grows. So we mow more often sometimes. Is there little things we can do to help things along there? What should we be doing for maintaining our shrubs as well as our grass?
Well, if you're maintaining your grass and you want to try to keep a weed-free turf, then your maintenance program is very important. You want to try to mow that grass at the mower's highest level, 3 inches, 3.5. That way you're promoting a good, strong, healthy root system, which would strangle out any attempt for a weed to infringe in that yard. Keep your blade sharp. Usually you're not going to sharpen your blade from year to year to year. I mean, I don't know how many homeowners that do that. So my recommendation is that you use a blade, all right? You're not going to cut as much during the wintertime, but when you're going into the summertime, buy a new blade. It should get you through, you know, unless you hit a rock or something like that and damage it. So that's what's going to promote less weeds in the turf grass. So, and the other part of that question was going in and doing your pruning. If you're pruning, right now I know that gardenias are in bloom, oleanders, but if you do have a shrub in your yard that is in bloom, just hold off on it. You don't want to prune that out because you're going to cut out any color. And after all, color is one of the reasons I think that we want landscape shrubs. Well, there's some other reasons, but color's a main one. Yeah. So I would wait for that bloom to finish up, and then you're going to go in and you're going to cut that back. And generally, the recommendation on that is no more than 1/3 of the size of that shrub pruned back. And we have a lot of good information, IFAS documents that will talk to you and show you really good ways to prune.
That's good. Now, if you have plants that flower all the time, like hibiscus and firebush, those kind of flower all the time. So you just prune them as needed? Or?
Yeah, that's what I would do because they come back pretty quickly. I mean, hibiscus, remember when we had all that cold and the hibiscus went all the way back down, when we would just cut that down to what we called the socks, and in no time, right from that root structure down there at the bottom, right from that growing point, that hibiscus would shoot up and you'd have flowers on it in really no time. So in instances like that, yeah, you can go back. But you got to be really careful because you keep doing that and you keep doing that and you keep doing that, and eventually that shrub is going to suffer.
Yeah, you're shortening the life of the shrub.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Well, and I know a lot of times people go through like once a month and do some minor pruning. Like if parts are sticking up above the rest of it, you get your hedge like this, and then there's parts sticking up. And I think it's good to remind people that hedges shouldn't be necessarily square, that they should be slightly rounded on the top and slightly flared on the sides. So I think that's important for sunlight to get to them.
Absolutely. What you want is at the bottom of that shrub, you want that to be wider, right, than at the top of it. Maybe at a 15-degree angle going up, you're gonna prune that, and that way sunlight can get down to the bottom of that shrub. If it's the other way around, light doesn't get down there, and it gets really sparse down there.
Then you get all these little leggy pieces sticking up.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, absolutely. When you're pruning like that, you have to take that into consideration. And in a number of the Homeowners Association, formal pruning is a part of their contract, so that's what you're going to look at. Some of the homeowners are like, okay, you know what, I like that natural look to it, and they're going to just go in and selectively prune.
Selectively prune, yeah. That takes a little more time than using, depending on whether you're using hand pruners or whether you're using electrical equipment.
Right.
So there's a lot more time involved with the hand pruners. Does it perhaps a job that you might want, but that's not usually what a professional is going to use.
Oh, no, it's just take up too much time.
It takes too much time, yes, that's very true. Well, so now insects, of course, and diseases are something that we also find in the summertime. And I noticed walking the dog, I've noticed some brown patches in people's yards. Some of the brown patches, once the irrigation heads were fixed in that community, have gone away. So that might have been just lack of water?
Well, it could have been, absolutely. Sometimes the sprinkler heads get clogged up in sandy soils if they're not maintained on a regular basis. A particle of sand can get in there, or something like that. The grass may be a little bit too tall, and your water just isn't getting to the area that you want it to. Oftentimes, you'll see that brown is a little bit closer to the sprinkler head than further away. But yeah, that's why now's a good time of year if you have a sprinkler system to go in and do some maintenance to it.
Well, I never thought of grass stopping the sprinkler. I never would have thought of that. Well, you
think about it. You're growing now. We're recommending turf grass to be at 3.5, 4 inches.
Right.
And in some of the older homes where they had the rotors that would pop up, they may only pop up 4 inches.
Yeah.
So when they do,
they're hitting that
grass.
Yeah.
So. When we were in the landscaping business, we would try to go in and trim around those, taking that into consideration. But now they're putting in 6-inch pop-ups or 6-inch rotor pop-ups. So
they get above it.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
Okay, well, that's good. Now, when you were talking about the irrigation, so is that something in the summertime? Obviously, we get a lot of rain, lots of times, and that's why they call it the rainy season. So are we supposed to be checking our irrigation? You mentioned checking the irrigation for heads that maybe are broken or something of that nature, but we also should making sure that our irrigation is not coming on right when it's raining.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because, we are getting into the rainy season, at least through definition. I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence of it.
Yeah.
Maybe a little out west of town, but certainly not around where I live. But, yes, you definitely have to have a rain shutoff device. Actually, by law, that rain shutoff device has to be installed every time a new system is put in. And another, I believe that they were looking at saying that if someone works on their irrigation system, this would be an irrigation contractor, not a homeowner, that they had to make sure that that is rain shutoff valve is connected to the system.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, because there's nothing to get 3 inches of rain a week once we get in the rainy season. And no, you don't need your irrigation to go on that. And in fact, that's a good way to be able to enhance leaf diseases on turf grass, especially.
Too much water.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't control Mother Nature, but we can control the irrigation output that we would have on there. So having a rain shutoff device is a way to go.
Yep.
And then when we are in drought times, or dry times now, where we're having few fires here and there, before we get into our official rainy season, as you mentioned, so there's things that they should be aware of then, too, is how often to water. How often do you water in the summertime as compared to watering in the rainy season? So what is the difference there? Is there a rule of thumb?
Well, on St. Augustine turf grass, anywhere from a ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch of water a week, either through supplemental irrigation or through Mother Nature. Okay, so that's a good rule of thumb to go by. With St. Augustine, with Bahia grass, you can probably cut that back to about a ½ of an inch. Anywhere around in there. And just to get back to that rain shutoff device, if you don't have one, just, common sense. You know what? It rained yesterday.
Yeah.
And my system is supposed to go on today. I can go ahead and manually turn that off and still be fine with it. Yeah. And a rain gauge in your yard, somewhere in your yard, is another good thing to have, because then you kind of, it helps you remember that, hey, it did rain in fact. Or that, it hasn't rained, so maybe I should turn that system back on. And
that rain gauge should be out from underneath, just like your rain sensor, out from underneath an overhang, so it can actually collect rain.
Yes.
And it probably should be in a place that you see often, so that you don't go, oh yeah, I should probably check that rain gauge, and that was maybe 3 days ago when we got the rain event, and now it's all dried up. Oh, I guess there wasn't any in there. So you got to make sure it's in an area, that you can actually see.
So you can remember that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You can remember to look at your rain gauge and say, yeah, I got enough rain here. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, because diseases need moisture to move and to be alive. So too much moisture will cause disease problems for many plants, not just our turf grass and ornamentals, but also vegetables that you might have in your garden.
Right, absolutely, and that's why early in the morning in the vegetable industry, they don't like harvesting real early, because if there is any disease, there's a real good chance that it can be just pulled right along. And
because of the moisture on the plant.
Yeah, and the same thing when you're cutting, when you're cutting turf grass, although sometimes it's really difficult, but you can move that disease, or insects as it were, right along with the way that
with your mower.
With your mower, sure.
Yeah, yeah, very good. So if they're doing mowing, and you mow a couple yards and not just your own, you should probably be washing it off in between yards so you don't carry anything with you. Do you use just water or soap, or what do you use?
You can just go ahead and use some water and try to get that deck cleaned off. Now, oftentimes, if you're in a big property owners association and you have a commercial outfit, that's just impractical.
Right, for you to go from one,
So the other thing is that you try to understand if there is a disease there, and if there is, then you just cut that last. Right. Now, as far as the insects, what we're starting to see, of course, with all the new growth, all those insects, they're going to be up at the top part of that plant. Traditionally that's where they are. They're looking for all of that good sugars and carbohydrates, that are being pulled up by the plant and put into new growth. So when you're out in the landscape and you're just out there for one reason or another, if you're scouting your landscape, that's where you're typically going to look to see if there's any new insect
Okay, and when you
problems.
say scouting your landscape, you're walking around.
Yeah, you're just walking around. You can do that really at any time. You know, if maybe after you get done with everything and you just want to go out and observe all the good
When it's
work
cooler
that
in
you've
the
done.
evening, right?
Yeah, you know,
Or
you have
whatever, yeah.
whatever, a glass of tea or whatever it is, and you're, you know, you're just walking around and you're looking at things, and that's really a pretty good time to notice it. And then also early in the morning is another good time. In the heat of the day, sometimes those insects have a tendency to try to go somewhere because they too say it's just way too hot.
Yeah. Now, is there some things we should be looking out this time of year for our turfgrass? Are there insects, diseases that we should be kind of watching for, like you said, for scouting?
I think chinch bug is the one that comes to mind quickly. It starts to really gain some strength in the heat of the season, especially along driveways or along sidewalks, hills that might face the southwest, somewhere where the turf has a tendency to become stressed. Why along the driveways? Because the sun will hit that driveway and reflect off
the heat.
The heat right in there. Or, you know, sometimes in a sprinkler head where if you don't get good coverage, the turf grass gets a little stressed. A chinch bug will have a tendency to go to that area. So how do you know if you have it or not? Well, just look in the edges of where you see some damaged turf, and the leaf blades will start turning a little yellow, and that's from the insects, you know, feeding off of the plant. And you go right to that edge, and you can just cut out a little piece of that right there, and actually just take it over the sidewalk and kind of pound on it and look, and you'll see them scurrying if you got a big problem. If not, cut that out and then bring it into us, and we'll take a look at it under a microscope, and we can let you know exactly
whether
what's
you're dealing with a disease or an insect.
And that's so important because you have to identify what you're up against if you're going to control it correctly.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to put a fungicide on when it's an insect problem.
Nope.
Or vice versa.
And vice versa, because you're going to still have that problem. Yeah, you got to identify what your problem is first.
Yeah, and I guess with shrubs, when you get insects, like you said, they go to the new growth. So one of the ways to control those, it would be to prune them off.
Right. Now, with your dog, sometimes what can happen is phytotoxicity. You know, if the dog wants to...
Oh, a certain spot every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you need to identify that too, rather than have it be a disease or something. Yeah.
Phyto, yeah. So, and that's... We've been called out before, and you know, and it's as circular as this table right here, and it's you know, almost perfect. I'm like, well, does your dog generally utilize this area? And yeah, he does. Well, then you know, so sometimes you know that happens as well.
Yeah.
And
well, that's where you have to be a detective or investigate. Kind of think things through before you. Yeah. That's a really good idea. And it's good to, like you said, identify things before you treat, because that's the way to identify that for sure.
And if you can't, then bring it into our office, right? And we have some really good master gardeners that can help, you know, figure that out for you.
Now, I know that we just touched briefly on the weed and feed, and I know there's a blackout period in this region, on the Treasure Coast, in fact, that there's no fertilization with nitrogen or phosphorus during the rainy season, or what we call June 1st through September 30th.
September 30th, yes.
Right.
And that ordinance has been put into place in unincorporated St. Lucie County. I believe that it's also in place in Port St. Lucie, city of Port St. Lucie. Yeah. I don't believe that it has been put in place.
It's in Fort Pierce, and it's also in St. Lucie Village.
Okay.
So the whole area.
So pretty much the entire area. And you, between June the 1st and September 30th, whether you're a commercial applicator or a homeowner, are not allowed to apply any fertilizer with nitrogen or phosphorus in it. And actually, the phosphorus is a year-round ban from that ordinance.
That's correct.
Because you know, the phosphorus naturally can build up in the soil, is what's being said. So yeah, between there and the end of September is when you cannot fertilize with any nitrogen or phosphorus.
Okay, so you can use other products, right?
Oh, sure,
in your landscape. So what else if we... Because a lot of times, especially with Bahia grass, when we have a lot of rainfall, it does tend to wash a lot of the nutrient available out, and you may get a yellowing.
Yeah.
And that's really nutritional, not disease, not insect. So there's other things you can use.
And a lot of times that's iron. So yeah, you can go in with an iron product, ironite, something along that nature, and that will green the turf grass up. It will not stimulate any growth, so you won't have any insect problem.
And you don't have to mow as much.
And you don't have to mow as much.
Right.
And that's really a good observation, because if you're going in at the wrong time and putting your fertilizer in, your turf grass is just going to jump up, and you're going to be cutting every 4 or 5 days,
Yeah.
6 days.
Yeah.
So some ironite you could put on your turf. Now it's going to keep your grass green for maybe 3 weeks, not a long time, and you might have to go back if you want to keep that green look with some repeated applications.
Is there like a slow release, or is it called chelated? Does the chelated iron?
Chelated iron, yes.
Does it release slower?
Well, what it does, it can release slower, but it also will buffer that iron particle against high pH soils.
Okay, which we tend to have.
Which
here.
we tend to have, and iron cannot be utilized as efficiently in those high pH soils.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we have a lot of people that ask that question. You know, I put my fertilizer out, whether it's a fruit tree or a citrus or lawns or whatever, and they put it out, and they still don't understand why everything looks the way it does. And a lot of times, like you're saying, it could be because the soil has a pH that's too high. So.
Right, and that's why that soil test is so important, and at least pH, because what can you do is you can put it into solution, and then that way it'll get to the root system
A little easier.
a little easier. Yeah, the roots will take that up. So
well,
that's one way to get around that, but you need to know where your soil pH is.
So they can come into our office in St. Lucie County, or most extension offices for that matter, will either be able to do your pH for you right there, or they'll send it off to the University of Florida's
Right, and we
office.
charge, at the office, we charge, what, 50 cents?
50 cents,
That's a great deal.
Yeah,
I mean,
not too bad.
well, considering that, you can end up spending how much money in
One fertilizer after another. Yeah, not
that's
realizing.
not cheap. Yeah,
no,
so.
that's not. That's exactly right. Yeah, those kinds of things. Well, those are some really good tips that you've given us. Anything else you'd like to mention about any other tip that you hadn't thought of or we hadn't discussed about?
Well, I think one of the things that you want to do is prepare your property for summer. And you can do that back in the cooler weather. You can do that back in February or March. Even though you're not thinking about it, you should be.
You should, because you know it'll get warmer.
Well, and you get out there and you say, okay, I've got to get this done and I got to get that done, and then
it wears you down.
And it does, because all of a sudden it's 90 degrees and you're not used to that, and it does wear you down, and you have to be really careful. So also, when you're out there, make sure you always keep yourself hydrated.
Yeah. And then even a hat, right?
A hat,
nice
sunscreen.
Big brim that kind of shades your face a little.
They now have clothing, long sleeve shirts.
That's repellent, or well, not repellent. Well, it does repel mosquitoes, but it also they have some that's sun sensitive, like sunscreen.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think you need to take all of that into consideration as much as how you're going to go out and practice your landscaping.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you for inviting me here.
You're welcome. Well, next time we'll be talking about something else just as great and just as important. So next time, we'll see you soon.